heart-based and heart-centered leadership is so important because they can engage at a deeper level with people.
Hello and welcome to our Meet the Coach series. I'm your host, Carla, Egan, and today we're exploring leadership. Simple, effective, everyday leadership. Our guest today is Sally Dillon from the Revolution Consulting Group. Sally has over 20 years experience, Sally, in HR, leadership development and coaching, and she takes a heart-centered approach to her work. She's created numerous training programs around leadership, and she's also an Amazon best-selling author. Sally joins us from New South Wales. Welcome to our Meet the Coach podcast, Sally.
Thank you so much. When you do an intro like that, I think, is that me?
Well, look, we're delighted to have you on because I love talking about leadership stuff. Now, in this episode, we are talking about leadership, but I want to start by asking you, Sally, to define for our followers and our listeners what heart-centered leadership is and why is it important?
Well, my definition of heart-centered leadership is leaders who are emotionally intelligent. They focus on outcomes rather than individual tasks. They encourage good decision making, and they also empower others to make decisions. They don't hold all that power to themselves. They're strategic thinkers, and they get things done. A heart-centered leader's goal is to truly inspire and empower people. And I think we used to always hear that old saying, leave your emotions at the door or leave whatever at the door. That's not what heart-centered leadership is all about. The heart actually represents emotions in leadership, and a heart-centered leader wants everybody to bring their whole person, everything, good, bad, and ugly, as well as bringing their whole person in and genuinely connecting with others. I believe that heart-based and heart-centered leadership is so important because they can engage at a deeper level with people. They really can engage the hearts and minds of others, and they can lead others and develop others much more effectively than focusing on just the task or the strategic side.
I like your definition, and I've just wrote down a few words, Sally, around it. Connecting at a deeper level, or engaging at a deeper level, I think you said, and I think that's really about connecting with the individual person. I mean, there's a lot of talk around mental health in the workplace, so I guess the heart-centered approach is really about being okay to express some vulnerability and having the courage to talk about some of those soft feelings that tend to not enter into business over the past decade or the past century. So I really like your definition and why it's important right now. Given your experience, what is a leader's number one job? What do you think?
I think a leader's number one job is to develop others. While they often also have that responsibility of the strategic direction and all of those other things, but to be a good leader, you need to be able to develop others, and that is growing others through on-the-job development, whether it's through external training, whether it's just through empowering decisions. Their number one job is always to grow and develop others.
Now, you've had 20 years experience in this, and it's not often we get coaches with such a breadth of experience, particularly in your HR roles as well. What's a common mistake, Sally, that you've seen throughout your career that leaders often make, and what advice do you have for those that may recognise them doing this same mistake themselves?
I think with a lot of leaders, they don't want to be the bad guy, particularly if they're heart-centered. They want to always be seen as supporting and approaching, and it's sometimes hard to have those difficult conversations. My advice is always to have the conversation early. Set your standards, set your boundaries, and if you pull somebody up on a minor sort of issue, it's not that they're getting in trouble as such, but it's setting the standards and boundaries early rather than having a really difficult conversation if you've let things go for a long period of time. Often leaders have that battle within themselves of like versus respect. And by the time they call HR or a leadership coach or another sort of coach, it's a big issue that could have been resolved with a really firm conversation in the beginning, or even a conversation about what's happening in their own or that person's life. So early intervention, that's the key.
And a little bit about setting expectations and some standards of ways operating. I notice that sometimes this mistake is often occurred when leaders go from being in a team role to managing that team, and that's a hard transition to make as well. Do you have any advice for people that might be in that position and getting promoted up through the ranks, Sally?
Oh, absolutely. That's actually one of the hardest parts of leadership, when you're going from mate to boss, contributor to leader. I would always say, number one is try and find a mentor or another leader, whether it's in your company, whether it's somebody outside of work that you can talk to things about and get some advice on. I also think, I would say, use policies as your standards and frameworks. So if you're in a business that has a code of conduct, you kind of let the policy speak for itself when it comes to some of those behavioral and standards. So you can always have the conversation and point back to the frameworks in place. I think that's a really easy way for leaders to just say, hey, we all have to adhere to these standards, or how we respect or speak to each other. I don't want to say let the policies be the bad guy as such, but let them frame the behavior, and then just hold everybody, even yourself, accountable. I think that's a really easy way to go in as a leader.
It's good advice for anyone in leadership. And I think values also of an organisation or a business are, standards of behaviour, acceptable behaviour. And when that behaviour is not met, then, it's about modelling what that looks like for the rest of the team and for themselves as well. Good point. Absolutely. About modelling that themselves. Sally, as a coach yourself, what does joining the coaching directory mean to you and to your business?
For me, really, I find the coaching directory really quite prestigious. There's so many Google searches and there's links to this and links to that, but the coaching directory is full of qualified people with experience. We've been vetted, as you know, because you do all of that. So you're actually getting experienced and qualified coaches, and to be standing or online with some of the other coaches in this field. I mean, I find it really prestigious, and I'm really proud that I've been accepted and my business is part of the coaching directory.
Well, thanks for those kind words, and it's a pleasure to have you as part of our community and on our directory, Sally. Well, this brings us to the end of our Meet the Coach series and interview. So thanks, Sally, for sharing. I'm going to start that again. Zoe. And that brings us to the end of our Meet the Coach interview today. Thanks, Sally, for sharing more about your heart-centered approach to leadership and your philosophy, and also your practical approach to help new and emerging leaders, but also to educate existing leaders about the evolution of leadership, because it does change throughout the decades.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And I think if you're the old school directive, do as I say, don't question things kind of leader, it's not going to cut it these days. You've got to move on.
Thank you. Well, thanks for shining a spotlight on that. And look, for those of you that want to dive deeper into the realms of coaching and personal development, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us, and be sure to catch us on our next episode. This is Carla Egan from the Coaching Directory, where we connect you to your ideal coach.